cities in the battleground, I think it deserves an exclamation mark, not a question mark. Chris makes it all sound so bloody obvious, doesn't he? This kind of joined up logical approach to, the way we exist on the planet, actually. So why, the answer, I thought it was a really good question over there about, how are we going to get this kind of thinking into mainstream activity in a way. And that's the question I've been asking myself for kind of years. I've been doing sustainability since 1980, actually. My first job with a title sustainability, and it was in 1980 in the Himalayas. And it's kind of, we've been, talking about this kind of stuff over and over again. It just feels like I'm kind of, for the first 20 years, actually, I was talking to myself. And the great thing is the last 10 years, actually a huge number of people have kind of now got on board. So it's been a really interesting journey. But for me, the kind of challenge is how do you get that incredibly logical sort of approach to, urban, rural, kind of into policymakers' minds? How do you get them to actually understand that we need to go beyond the kind of boundaries we always put up, whether it's in education, whether it's in the way we communicate, whether it's, the papers, one page of the paper would be talking about climate change, the other about the need for growth, etc. No attempt to kind of join any of this stuff up. How do we get that kind of big idea kind of over? It just seems too big for simple, small minds. That picture of the cities I thought was really fascinating. Because I've been flying over London, I've been in Brazil actually kind of recently, working there quite a lot. It's a really interesting place to work. But sort of flying back, you fly over cities in, across Europe, across the South America. And actually what makes Britain really unique is we're one of the few countries that really have green cities. You fly over places like Los Angeles, well, most of the cities in America, you fly over many cities in Africa, in South America, and actually they're just concrete. There's incredibly little nature within the city. The nature is outside these huge, diverse tracts. There's very little attempt to kind of integrate those two things. So I think we should really appreciate, actually, the incredible richness which is the gardens, but the green spaces in Britain. And also, I thought it was interesting from the Desperate People that actually you said that there's probably only you and one other person that's been around since 1984. Actually, it seems like we've all been here since, well, there's only one person who hasn't been around since 1984. When I've thought about communication and I'm not a communicator, I'm somebody who's been involved in delivering projects for the last 30 years and most recently working on the Olympics. My inspiration actually came from walking. I lived down in West Hampstead in London, and my school was on the other side of Hampstead Heath, and I literally spent every day for 7 years walking across Hampstead Heath. And it was that experience, actually, which really kind of brought nature home for me. I think it kind of really gave me a feel for nature. And when I lived in the Himalayas, I used to go for a bit of an escape up to this amazing ridge where I would see 8 of the biggest 14 mountains in the world. And I would think the only view that was better than that was the view from Parliament Hill looking at London. And so in many ways it is, because the richness of those two experiences of the city and nature, trees and grass and bird song, etc., is quite a sort of powerful, extraordinary kind of experience with the city in front of you. And so it's that. I'll come back to that in a sec. So I work on this mega project, the Olympics, and I've been trying to sell, among many other things, I'm the head of sustainability, not just biodiversity and ecology, but a whole series of things around water and energy and green construction, etc., and waste management and material use. But it's an incredibly difficult sell on a project where concrete, steel, stadiums and infrastructure is what it's really all about, trying to get people to appreciate the importance of nature. But we've been incredibly lucky with the London Olympics because we set out, when we put our bid together, to be the greenest games ever. And so I've had that kind of support, or that flag to wave as I work as the head of sustainability, but actually with 1,000 other people, 10,000 people on the project, but we reckon about 1,000 people who are committed in one way or another to the sort of whole sustainability debate in many different ways. And we give an award out for people who've done, contractors and subcontractors who've done something really interesting to contribute to the whole sustainability agenda on the Olympics during construction every month. And the amount of joy, actually, the amount of interest there is in that award and the amount of pride in getting that award is extraordinary. So the most important thing we've done on the Games is really to instigate a kind of a movement around delivering sustainability, to articulate what it is we want, and then to instigate a movement around sustainability. It's very solutions orientated, it's very kind of practical, it's about doing things, and because we work with contractors, so that's what they're into. Just thoughts for the conference, just before I go through some slides. I think nature really suffers from a lack of, and environment from lack of ownership. It's quite controversial, but I'll throw that one out to you. A second idea is you don't miss, and Chris actually said this, I don't think you miss nature until it's gone. It's kind of quite extraordinary to be in places where nature sort of disappeared. For one, I used to repair landslides for a living for the first 10 years of my life. And actually, so I was kind of, you actually see the reaction that people have once a kind of an old forest that people knew, or a piece of, or a major kind of valley has kind of disappeared. It's then that people really begin to wake up to the kind of what's missing. And what my worry is that we're not going to wake up to the kind of the destruction that's going on at the moment around really important ecosystems. I've just come back from the dry forests of Brazil, and there's kind of mass kind of loss of that and the Atlantic forest, mass loss, and people are just beginning to wake up to kind of what that means, but it's taken a long time. It's not until they've kind of really seen for themselves the sort of devastation afterwards that we've begun to kind of think about it. And nature's been a free good, I think, for far too long, and therefore taken for granted in the economic system we have. And so we need to find a way of kind of, again, endowing value. But and unfortunately, the kind of values that we use are economic values. So we need to find ways of really valuing nature. And so how we reconnect with nature, I think it's really going back to the wetland trust talk. I thought what was really interesting, and one of the things I kind of find very difficult, is I don't think that instant hits of nature and going and doing a bit of interactivity in a wildlife reserve, I'm quite happy to argue this, kind of works. I think nature and an appreciation of nature, and I think what we really require from people now is to kind of have real awe, to be really inspired, to really enjoy, and to kind of get, to fall in love with nature, actually. I think that's what we're looking for. It requires time, it requires habit, and so we need to really get to grips with that. But the Olympics really is about a huge new urban project. It's a new piece of city in London, a city that was completely derelict, a part of the city that was the dumping ground for London, that's been crisscrossed by huge amounts of infrastructure, the A13 and the A12 urban motorways. We're not allowed to call them that anymore, but that's what they were. Huge, large 4 or 5 rail systems, 8 kilometres of waterway. These systems that kind of locked in an industrial hinterland that had no connections with anything else, and have really kind of ruined the land. But it's an amazing piece of land. It's an amazing piece of land because it connects to a whole ribbon of ecological interest, the park, the Lee Valley Park, that runs out beyond the M25 up to Hertfordshire and then down to the Thames. So it's a really important part of a whole ecosystem that's kind of not really understood by many people and not known by many people in London, but yet everybody in London pays for it. And the whole point about the Olympics, during the Olympics, is huge security issues. We bring 80 of the world's leaders, we bring 17,000 athletes, is we're going to build a big fence around this park. But the big ambition is to open the park up to all the other communities around and to make it a part of something much bigger. And so here we are beginning to create this new park. It'll be the biggest new urban park created in over 100 years, 102 hectares of public open space. And we want to do this with 45 hectares of biodiverse, rich landscape. So it'll feel very, very different. And it's about opening up public space to the huge number of estates. We have the average life expectancy of people living in this area is 8 years less than people living in the centre of London. So it's really about opening up new experience to those people living around here. And here's some of what we found, the dumping grounds. These are old shopping trolleys, incredible bits of ecology, but also things that had to go. So this really was the dumping ground. This is what Olympics in Athens and in Beijing looked like after the games. They're not used. So for us, it was all about legacy. How do we make sure this park is properly used? How do we build? This is an old Colosseum in Italy, in Lucca, that evolved over time into something completely different. How do you create buildings that can change and evolve? How do you create landscape that can do that? And so we've really thought very much about what happens in the whole succession from the Games, which is this extraordinary moment when 9 million people turn up. We have the world's press, 4 billion people watching us. We have, we have to plan the whole thing around crowds and security. How do we turn that into a proper urban park over the next 6 months, 6 months after the Games, and then over the next 20 years redevelop the whole site? And so we use these principles to kind of plan and think about the whole of the Olympics. These are taken from One Planet Living principles. This is a map of urban deprivation, and we're in the middle of that. The redder the map, the more urban deprivation. So for us, it was all about reconnecting London. This is the eventual master plan, but at the heart of this, as I say, is a park which we'll be putting in for the Games with minimal change after the Games. This is what the park will begin to look like, with new wetlands, new 300,000 new wetland species, 20,000 plants, UK-grown semi-mature trees, native trees being planted, 45 hectares, as I say, of landscape. It's really about this reconnecting with the river. This has been a river that's been underutilised for 40 years, completely kind of silted up, now completely open. So here's the beginning. You've got the stadium and the aquatic centre here, and the beginning of us repairing 8 kilometres of waterways, dredging and opening that up, taking out cars, etc. This is what the velodrome, the aquatics will look like after the Games. This is what the velodrome will look like. It'll be a pavilion, a beautiful pavilion, about 35% more energy efficient than any other pavilion, any other venue built in this way, using FSC-grown timber, trying to connect those stories in with the wider stories, but creating a fantastic open space for around a whole cycling community in this part of London. This is an urban, the first membrane bioreactor. We're going to be cleaning up our sewage on the site, and all of the irrigation around the site will be fed by the sewage, treated to a non-potable standard, and all of our toilet flushing will come from that. So we're really beginning to think about some of the other ecological opportunities here. This is the beginning of the park being created, opening up the whole of the wetland. This was a very, very closed concrete embankment. We're opening all of this up and allowing nature and wetlands to come. We're going to let the river flood. That takes over 1,000 homes in Canning Town, just up the road, out of the floodplain. So we're thinking about this green infrastructure as the whole kind of concept that underpins this 102 hectares of development. This is what the park will look like during the Games. We're trying to make sure the minimum change after the Games. We're preparing it all for the Games. You can see virtually no change whatsoever. This is what it'll look like in Legacy. Again, another view of the park and the wetlands looking up down towards the stadium. And this is what it looks like after, with new meadows, new grasslands, new woodland, and another view, kind of a really fantastic ecological experience. So it'll be a very, very different park, but it's created just next door to the oldest park, the first municipal park, Victoria Park, which was created to keep the hoi polloi out of the middle of town. And here's a very different reason for creating a park. And this is what the development will look like over the next 25 years. The Queen's endorsed all of this. She's our greatest fan, and we're her greatest fan. So, very, very quick run through some of the things we're trying to do in London. I mean, ridiculously sort of fast run through, but at the heart of all of this is this idea to re-engage people both in the built environment but also in nature, and to bring real nature back into the city, and to bring multifunctional green space back into the city. Thanks very much.